Now, I want to begin this segment by sharing with you that there are audio tapes. The Rebbe spoke about this Sfarim 4 times, probably, or 5 times. And the way the Rebbe spoke was that the Frierdiker was alive. That was the spirit of his message. When the previous Rebbe first passed away in 1950, the Rebbe spent a year, during that same year when he was hesitating becoming the Rebbe, arguing over and over and over and over again that the life of a Rebbe isn't physical, the life of a Rebbe is spiritual, and therefore the Rebbe is still living. Once the Rebbe became Rebbe, that language, that form sort of went into the background, and it resurfaced. When the story of the Sfarim happened, the Rebbe began to speak the same kind of way that the previous Rebbe was alive, using the same sources. There's sources in Gemara for this, there's sources in Chazal for this, there's all kinds of sources. And there's a rather emotional statement of the Rebbe where the Rebbe said that I'm screaming that the Rebbe is alive, the previous Rebbe is alive, and that every day he's more alive. And he's screaming that he was at the funeral 35 years ago, he was by the Levaya. And the Rebbe said, so you can understand a little bit the extent to which we don't have the same language. The Rebbe used the word sarcastically, that we do have the same language. In other words, he lives in one world, I live in a different world. In his world, when someone passes away, they're finished. In my world, when a person passes away, their body passes away, but their whole life continues. And when you're talking about a tzaddik, that's a very, very real thing. That was the spirit of how the Rebbe talked. The Rebbe was very, very passionate about it. Okay? But the question that I want to address now is the question of why. Why did it happen? Well, we all know why did it happen. It was a feud. It was a feud over money. It was a feud over ego. It wasn't just about money. It was really personal. There was a lot of hurt feeling, a lot of anger directed towards the Rebbe, which the Rebbe really was not deserving of. It was really, really ridiculous on the face of it. But nevertheless, there was a fight. It was a very unpleasant story. And the Rebbe spoke publicly about it in 3 units of time. He spoke about it in the beginning when the discovery that the books were taken happened. He spoke about it during the trial, which was Hanukkah time, 39 years ago this year. And he spoke about it when we won. And he actually said 3 entirely different things. Initially, when the Rebbe spoke about it in the summer of 1985, he used the language of the Frierdiker Rebbe is alive. Yankov the Rebbe is alive, Mazar Rebbe. The whole language that I described to you before, how the life of a tzaddik was never a physical life, and as long as his spirit lives, he lives, and therefore you cannot divide the estate of a living person. During the trial, the Rebbe spoke about it a lot. Hanukkah, 39 years ago, I was not in New York. I was away from New York the entire time. I left right before it started, and I came back right after it finished. I missed the whole Pasha. I was not here at all. But we followed everything. We're living on planet Earth, and they already had hookups and fax machines. It wasn't during the days of email, but we would get all the stuff from New York very quickly. And we knew what was going on. We were partners. We were very much a part of the proceedings. During Hanukkah of 1986, the Rebbe, I think like in 2 days, praying 3 times. It was very, very heavy with talk and with inspiration. The Rebbe wanted that we should put up a Hanukkah menorah in every city in America. We went to places where there were no Jews. Put up a menorah. Because the Rebbe's attitude was that if there's a challenge to the viability of Chassidus, the way to offset that challenge is to do more, which I will explain to you in a few minutes. So during the actual trial, during the 3 weeks of the trial, the language that the Rebbe employed was the need to do more, to remove the objection. Okay, and I'll explain this to you. That when the Alter Rebbe was arrested, this is a famous story, and the Rebbe, of course, told the story. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he sat in jail. And the first time he literally sat in a dungeon. The second time he was treated much more respectfully, but the first time he sat literally in a jail cell, in a dungeon, for 53 days. So the story is famous. It's brought in the Beis Rebbe, but the Rebbe repeated the story. that while he was in jail, he was visited by his Teves, by the Holy Maggid and the Holy Baal Shem Tov, who had passed away decades before. The Baal Shem Tov had passed away almost 50 years before. Almost 50 years before, and the Mizrach Maggid had passed away 36 years before. And the Alter Rebbe said to his Rebbes, why am I sitting in jail? They came to him, the way the Rebbe told the story, they came in a body, although they had already passed. And he asked them, why am I sitting in jail? And they said, you're sitting in jail because you're spreading too much Chassidus. So the Alter Rebbe said, well, if I'm sitting in jail for spreading too much Chassidus, I'll do less. And they told him, no, if you survive, you should do even more. This is what they told him. And the Alter Rebbe understood from this that the criticism levied against him for spreading too much Chassidus is not because spreading Chassidus is the bad thing. Chassidus is actually a good thing. Right? Why would anybody have an issue with teaching people how to serve Hashem? And the answer is, when you reveal Chassidus, you're revealing secrets of Torah. And when you reveal secrets of Torah, they have to be used properly. They have to be taken advantage of. And if you reveal secrets of Torah, people waste them, it becomes a waste. It becomes an inefficient use. And that's how the Alter Rebbe understood why he was arrested. His arrest physically was because someone on earth didn't like him. Spiritually, he was arrested because there was a challenge to the derech, to the philosophy of life, and to the ways of Hasidus and the teachings of Hasidus that he was revealing. There was an objection to what he was doing and that he shouldn't do it. But he saw his victory, his Didan Notzach, his Pada B'Shalom, his exodus from his incarceration, as being a victory that was declared on high also, up there, not just here. In other words, the Alter Rebbe went to jail because he was spreading Hasidus. The Alter Rebbe was released from prison because he was told that what he was doing and revealing Hasidus was a good thing. But what changed between when he was arrested and when he was released? The answer is that they did more. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, the Hasidim made 3 committees. One committee to try and help get him out of jail, one committee to worry about his family, and one committee to spread more Chassidus. So when the case of the Sfarim was going on, the Rebbe spoke a lot about the books, and he spoke about the idea that when there is an objection to a person revealing more Torah in the world, the solution is to bring even more, not to cut back, to do even more. Because that's where the objection is rooted. The objection is rooted in the fact that we should be doing more, and we're not doing enough, and we should do even more. This was the language that Rebbe spoke at that time. So during that month, Kislev of 1986, Tafshin Mem Vav, 85-86, there was a huge increase in Mitzvayim. We lit Chanukah Menorahs any place we could. The Rebbe wanted us to do as much as possible, in the belief that if we'll do more, we'll win this fight. Rabbi Shlomo Kunyan from California, who lived me well, there's no youngster, when we won the case, spoke in 770, and he said every Menorah is 100 books, and every film is 10 books. He talked about how the different Pu'ulas Teves, the good deeds that Hasidim did, were the reason the case was won. Because that's how the Rebbe described it, that when there's a challenge to your legitimacy, spiritually, you don't pull back, you do more. And you earn your legitimacy spiritually. So for those who are not clear, in the summer of 85, when the Rebbe talked about the books and the previous Rebbe, his language was the Frierdiker Rebbe is alive, you cannot distribute the estate of a living person. During the trial, the Rebbe spoke about the fact that if there is an objection to what we are doing, it's because we're not doing enough and we need to do more. Okay? But then we won. In the summer, in the winter, in exactly 38 years ago this week, this coming Sunday, will be the 30th anniversary of that case, of winning the case, of Didan Notzach, as we call it, and the celebration that followed and all the other events that followed. When the Rebbe spoke about it the third time, he said something very, very interesting and really powerful, incredibly powerful. I'll tell you the story as I understand it, okay? I don't know. I know very little about law, really. The only thing I know less about than law is finance. I don't understand money at all. I don't understand business and investment. But I don't understand the law because the law makes sense in a box. It makes sense in a certain context. The law sometimes lacks common sense. And of course, being a lawyer, being a practitioner of law, is knowing the parameters of law and knowing how to manipulate it to your advantage. I'm not saying to cheat, but you have to understand the system and work within the system to be to benefit from the system. So there was a trial that went on for 3 weeks. Every day, from morning till night, there were witnesses brought to testify. And a lot of these witnesses literally explained what Chassidus is, what the Rebbe is, what the Baal Shem Tov wanted, what Lubavitch is. People say it was like going to a series of lectures by world-class experts on these subjects. We brought our witnesses. We brought people like Elie Wiesel to testify on behalf of the Rebbe. They brought their witnesses, also scholars from universities, experts on Chassidus, to give their perspectives. There were also personal testimonies about who owned the books, public or private. You know that the Rebbetzin was deposed. The Rebbetzin Chaim Moshe, the Rebbe's wife, was deposed for 4 hours. And Rabbi Krinsky recently revealed that the case lasted for 3 weeks. It finished on a Friday. Right before that day's proceedings closed, the judge asked to see the Rebbetzins deposition again. He'd watched it before. And he watched it for 20 minutes. And he said when it was over, remarkable. He was really impressed with the Rebbetzin. Remarkable. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but in my dumb perspective, what you see when you watch the Rebbetzin talk is she doesn't say an extra word. One of the most important things your lawyer will tell you if you're ever on trial is answer the question. That's it. Don't give, because anything extra is going to be held against you. They're going to use you like a meat grind. And I think on a very down-to-earth level, the Rebbetzin, who was then 86 years old, performed brilliantly. Rabbi Krinsky was afraid, and the Rebbe said to him, don't worry, she'll pass. And he said in English, she'll pass with flying colors. And she did. They talked to her for 4 hours. They tortured her. They really, really bothered her. And she answered every question, but she only answered questions. That's it. She didn't say anything more. And I think it's quite impressive. I don't know what the judge meant, but this is a fact. That he watched, the last thing he did at the end of the trial was take out the video of the Rebbetzins deposition a second time and watched it for a while. And he commented that it was remarkable. The Rebbe said that it was her words that swayed the judge, ultimately. But then it took a year, 12 months, for the judge to give a verdict. And there was no way to know. The judge did not play his hand. And during the trial, it was very hard to know what the judge was actually thinking. There were times that you thought that he was leaning towards our side. There were times, again, I missed it all. I didn't see any of this. But my friends did. My brother did. He was always keeping me up. Every week I'd call my brother, get a lowdown of what was going on at 770. But on a Tuesday morning, both sides were told that the judge has a verdict. They should come to the court to pick up the verdict, the written verdict. And the judge gave the verdict on a Tuesday morning, and we won everything, which was a big surprise. So the story goes, Rabbi Prinsky went to the court to pick up the verdict, and he came to 770 to deliver it to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was in his room, and the Rebbe was working. He was one of the Rebbe's secretaries, which means he had right to walk into the Rebbe's room. I would imagine that you didn't just walk in, you knocked. And the Rebbe, the Rebbe would say, Arain, you can come in, and then you would walk in. And he handed the Rebbe the verdict, or he told the Rebbe the verdict. The way Rabbi Krinsky tells the story was the Rebbe did not even look up. He continued working. Just continued going. Rabbi Groner says that the Rebbe asked him if there could be an appeal. And Rabbi Groner says there could be an appeal. So the Rebbe said, what are they singing and dancing about? There could be an appeal. But when the Rabbi Krinsky told the Rebbe, the only reaction the Rebbe got was, call the Rebbe, tell my wife. Tell the Rebbe. Because she struggled and suffered with the Rebbe during this whole parsha. She fought on the Rebbe's side against her sister. It was not a pleasant experience for the Rebbe to win the way he felt that it needs to be. And the only comment that made Rabbi Krinsky was that to tell the Rebbe, downstairs, I can't tell you what was going on. It was pandemonium. It made Simchas Teda look like Tisha B'Av. It was nuts. So when the Rebbe had to come out to Mincha, the Rebbe did Mincha upstairs in the small shul. They got the Rebbe. They asked the Rebbe to go downstairs. They walked the shul downstairs. The walls were dripping. The energy was unbelievable. And remember again, I was not there. I listened to this on Hookup in Los Angeles, and the Rebbe went to his place and showed no reaction to what was going on around. The Rebbe walked into the shul like as if he had no idea that there was a big celebration. Everyone's in a very good mood, and quite a few people were after the influence of a lot of Inkenhall, as they say. They went to the front of the shul. He davened mincha. He asked for a chumash at some point. We were listening to the play-by-play. We were on the hookup, so they would tell us what's going on. They asked for a chumash. And the Rebbe spoke. It was a surprise. The Rebbe showed no emotion. The Rebbe showed no joy. He didn't in any way encourage the singing. We didn't need his help at that time. We were doing just fine by ourselves. And if the Rebbe had helped us along, the ceiling would have come down. But the Rebbe did speak. And it was Tuesday of Parshas Vayigash, which was yesterday's Chitas. And he spoke a number of things. But the point that I wanted to focus on first is, he spoke about the books, and he says, there was a contention. There was an objection to the ownership of the books. To whom do the books belong? To whom the 770 belongs? The basis for the contention was the argument that Agudas Chasidei Chabad is no longer active. That this trust, this public organization, the Union of Lubavitcher Hasidim, who was the owner of these books, who was the owner of this home, who was the owners of this trust, only remain the owners of the books and the owners of the building, the owners of the trust, if they're active in their work. If they stop existing, the trust disappears, the community disappears. So the Rebbe says the objection was that the community is not sufficiently active. And if the community is not sufficiently active, then you can go back to a question of private ownership. But then the Rebbe says something very remarkable. The Rebbe says, how could anybody say that? How could anybody say that Lubavitch, Agudas Chasidei Chabad, is not active enough after what's been done in the last 35 years? Now I want to give you context. The Alter Rebbe was a big Rebbe, right? He had great Chassidim. And the Alter Rebbe understood that he went to jail because he hadn't done enough in spreading Chassidus. He needed to do more. Our Rebbe said, it's impossible to say we didn't do enough. Now the Rebbe is not lying. He's not trying to make us feel good. The Rebbe said it because he believed it. The Rebbe believed that in the times of the Alter Rebbe, the great Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, as much as they had done to spread Chassidus, they had not done enough, and as a consequence of this, the Alter Rebbe went to jail. Our Rebbe said, it's impossible to say that Lubavitch has not done enough because we've done so much. It can't be explained this way. So the Rebbe went back to the question. If, in fact, Agudas Chasidei Chabad is alive and active, as it is, and as the Rebbe said then, every day he's more alive, every day he's more energetic, every day he's more robust, every day he's more active. And this is a story of 38 years ago. You think about Lubavitch today, Lubavitch is amazing. Lubavitch is a ness. It's such a miracle. I mean, most of you are joining Lubavitch. Most of you never saw the Rebbe in your life. Your parents never saw the Rebbe. You're involved with a Rebbe who's gone from this earth a time and a half as long as you're on this earth. Literally. So what brings you here? Because it's living. It's not the past, it's the present. It's not dead, it's alive. It's alive because of Chassidim. It's alive because of Shluchim. It's alive because we live the way the Rebbe wants us to live, in the kind of way that because of us, in us, by us, and through us, the Rebbe lives. And it draws people in unprecedented numbers. It's an amazing thing. And I like to say this because no one else is saying it. People talk about the miracle of Shlichus, and it is a miracle. Shlichus has been multiplied, 500% since Gimel Tammuz, or more. But I tell you that as no less a miracle as the miracle of the Lubavitch community. The family of Lubavitch Hasidim. We got politics, we got our stuff, but we are one community. If you look in other places in the Jewish world that have similar situations to our own, they're torn asunder, they don't talk to each other. We got our differences, we're very, there's people who believe this, people who believe this, and they really disagree. But I tell you that just as great a miracle as the onset and the continuation of the body of Shlichus is, the fact that Lubavitch is a community, still is a community, and still sees itself as a family, in spite of all the wrinkles and the scratches and the whatever else it is, it's mamish anes. But this was the story of the books then. The claim was that Lubavitch is over. And the Rebbe's Lubavitch is over? Lubavitch has never been more alive than it is right now. If Lubavitch is more alive than it is right now, so what was the book taken for? In other words, if you compare it to the Alter Rebbe said, if we did more, it wouldn't have happened. And the Rebbe said, nah, we did plenty. So why did it happen? In other words, the philosophical idea was the same. That the going to jail, the books being taken, was a sign that they were not happy with us on high. And when they're not happy, it creates a sneeze in this world. But the Rebbe said, we're not like the times of the Alter Rebbe. In times of the Alter Rebbe, it may have been true that Chassidim should have done more to spread Chassidus. You can't say that about our generation. So the Rebbe asked the question, considering what we have done in the last 35 years, I don't understand how the books could have been taken. How this In other words, not that Pliny ben Pliny, this particular person, could have taken the books on the physical level. Because the Rebbe wasn't paying attention to the physical level. The Rebbe always looked at the spirit of it. The books were not taken because he didn't get along with his nephew. The books were taken because upstairs they were not happy with him. And they said, how could they be unhappy? Look what we've done. And the Rebbe's final answer, after talking about it, was that there's nothing wrong with what we've done. They simply want us to do more. That's what he said. That the reason the books were taken is not because there's anything wrong with the Teves of the Lubavitch debate. Agudas Chassidic Chabad is so alive, it's impossible to say anything to the contrary. So why were the books taken? Because they're saying, Lamaila, you're doing great, but we want more. We want more. We want more. That's how the Rebbe himself explained the taking of the books. Now, in that same Sikha, which was on a Tuesday, today is Wednesday, that year was Tuesday V'yigash. It was yesterday's Chitas. If you remember yesterday's Chitas is the perfect Chitas for the events connected to Hamisha Teves and Teves. Because what is the story of yesterday's Chitas? That Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. He tells them, go back home, tell your father I'm alive, and tell him to come to Mitzrayim. Right? You learned Chitas yesterday. There's different versions of how the Aliyahs are divided, but according to the Chabad custom, they go back to Eretz Yisrael and they tell Yankov Avinu, Oid Yosef Chai, is still alive. And of course, as Chazal say, not only he's alive biologically, he's the same Yossel, the same Yosef that called Teirosai, all the Torah that Yankov Avinu learned in Shem Be'evi gave with Yosef. Yosef is now running the world, and he's the same Yosef he was 22 years before when he left you. And Yaakov wouldn't believe it, right? This is the story. So the Aliyah finishes, yesterday's Chitas finishes with the words, Vatchi Ruach Yaakov Aviyah. The spirit of Yaakov came to life. So Rashi says. And the Rebbe spoke about all of this in thinly veiled form, but he did speak about it. That Shar Sa'alav Ruach HaKodesh, that it says in Sfarim, Rashi brings it in Chumash, that for a person to have Ruach HaKodesh, for a person to experience prophecy, they have to be in a good mood, they have to be happy. When a person is depressed, when a person is sad, the Ruach HaKodesh leaves them. So when Yosef Atzaddik disappeared, Yaakov became depressed. And as Rashi said in Pashas Vayeshev, he was unconsolable. He could not be calmed down because, in fact, Yosef was still alive. The halacha is, Teves says, when someone dies, we forget. It's considered a very big bracha. Forgetting is a bracha. But you only forget once a person actually passes away. Yaakov wouldn't forget because even though he didn't know it, Yosef was alive. So for 22 years he mourned. So for 22 years he lost his Ruach HaKodesh. So when Yaakov is told that Yosef is still alive, he gets back his Ruach. That's how yesterday's Chitas finishes. And it was the day that we won the books. You couldn't have, if you go through the entire Chumash, there's about 350 aliyahs. There's not another aliyah that comes close to serving the purposes of the story of the Didan Notzach as this one. That Yosef, the Frierdiker Rebbe's name was Yosef. Yosef is still alive. The whole thing is so dramatic. At the time, it was dramatic. You look at it in hindsight, it's like you couldn't have timed this better if you were writing your own script. That the whole issue was, on a spiritual level, what is a Rebbe? Is a Rebbe living? And the answer to that question is, look at the Chassidim. If you want to see if a Rebbe is alive, look at his Chassidim. And if you claim that the Rebbe is not living because you don't like how the Chassidim look, the Chassidim have to take a look in the mirror. And the Rebbe says, I like what I see. I like what I see in the mirror. So what's the deal? We have to be more alive. And the Rebbe said in that same Sikha that the end of that story is Yaakov comes to life. And the Rebbe didn't say it, but he implied it, that for the Rebbe, this was a redemption that Pasha Bor gave him back his life. So this is the story of the books. So every person, this is the story. And for a week we celebrated. And the Rebbe spoke almost every night. During that week, the Rebbe said that there's a Eis Ratzah, it's a special moment. You can ask for anything you want, and whatever you want, you'll get. And the Rebbe said, you don't have to worry about me reading it, because I'm not even going to read your note. I'm going to take it straight to the oil and drop it by the feet to get up. And from all over the world, people sent letters. Many people were non-Lubavitch. And there were big miracles. People didn't have children. The Rebbe just took bags and bags and bags of letters from the whole world and just dumped it by the feet of the Rebbe. So he says, I'm not even going to read it. The previous Rebbe will read it himself. So you don't have to worry about anybody reading your private affairs. You can ask whatever's on your heart and your mind. And you can have bracha v'atzlocha, bakel mikakel, and all good things. It's for a week. At the end of that week, the Rebbe, like I said, he lassoed us in. And at the time, the Rebbe said, forget about it. Forget about the books, forget about the case. The Rebbe said not even to read the verdict to the judge. But then they made an appeal. And we won the appeal a year later, on the 25th day of the month of Cheshvan, which is like someplace in November of 1987. And the Rebbe shut that down. We wanted to make another week of partying. I was back. Yes, I wanted to make up for lost time. And the Rebbe didn't let them. He said, go to learn. Last year was enough, you know. So when it came the first anniversary of that date, which was 1988, there was a big split in Lubavitch. All the older Hasidim were afraid to make too much of a party because they understood from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wants to put it behind him, like as if it never happened. The Bachrim wanted to make the biggest tumult, and guess what? I was in Russia. I missed that too. I missed everything next to the books. I was fortuitously not here. I missed that also. So it was a Pashat division in 770. Should they celebrate it? Anyway, the Bachrim managed to put up a sign on the wall. They screwed it into the wall in such a way that there was no way to take it down before Shabbos, announcing the day and the celebration, and the Magabai, the elder, everyone was worried how the Rebbe was going to react. Anyway, the Rebbe started the Fabrengen the next day with saying that on the wall it's written that today is a special day, it's a big Yom Tov, and the Rebbe made it a Yom Tov, and he quoted the Gemara by Chanukah. That when the story of Chanukah happened, it wasn't made a Yom Tov right away, it was made a Yom Tov the following year. And the Rebbe said the same thing, L'shon Acheres Kovim, that Hey Teves on the Yom Tov the year after. So the official birth date of this celebration in Lubavitch is not 1987, but 1988. And I want to explain to you how I lived this, and how I experienced this, and how I felt it, and how I feel it, with the few minutes that I have left. It's almost as if you were to say that the books were not on trial. The Rebbe was on trial. And when you say that Rebbe was on trial, what you're really saying is he real or is he not real? Is this real or not? You know, everybody knows what a dollar bill is. But what about spirituality? What about life? What about metaphysical truths? How real are they? How true are they? We have only one barometer, we have only one measure about the credibility of anything metaphysical. And the barometer is how much it takes root in the world. The truth of a spiritual philosophy is in the people who practice it, who sustain it, who live it, who continue to pass it along to their children, who don't let it die, who keep it alive. And it was a fight, and I hate to use that word, it was a struggle over books and over a building, which on a very technical level was a financial thing, was a monetary thing, was dollars. On a little bit more pointed level, it was ego. It was a personal fight. But on the Rebbe's level, it was a challenge to the credibility of the idea of Lubavitch. The previous Rebbe came to this country, and he created a whole new Lubavitch. The Rebbe succeeded him 10 years after he got here, and expanded and broadened and revolutionized further the new ideas, the new philosophy, the new approach that the previous Rebbe brought to this country, about the idea of worrying about every Jew in the world, and that the flavor of Hasidus of our generation is more about Mivtzoyim than about Avodah Satfila, which is the tradition of Chabad. And then someone comes along and questions all of it. And you can question it many ways. One of the ways you question it is that made a whole new Lubavitch, you know. There used to be an old Lubavitch. Old Lubavitch was very uptight and very insular and very intense and very small. Now you have a much more open Lubavitch, much more positive Lubavitch, much more generous Lubavitch, much more pluralistic Lubavitch. This is a new fish. And the Rebbe says the same fish, same exact living being that adapted because the world changed, not because Chassidus changed. And that what was on trial. Is this the Alter Rebbe or not the Alter Rebbe? Is it the Baal Shem Tov or not the Baal Shem Tov? Is it Moshe Rabbeinu or not Moshe Rabbeinu? That's what it came down to. And if somebody can come along and say, this is my private property, so physically he's asking for the money. Physically he's asking for the property. Spiritually, he is arguing against the new version of Hasidus, which is ours. That is what was on trial. And the verdict of the judge, who the Rebbe made a point of saying was a non-Jew, because he wasn't Jewish, when it comes to Jewish affairs, he's not a man of free will. He says what God tells him to say, subconsciously, subliminally. The Didan Notzach winning meant, no, this is the same fish. It's very much alive, and it's the same thing. In other words, the story of Teves, this celebration, which we have this Sunday coming up, is a celebration of the vibrancy of the Rebbe. The Rebbe lives. And the Rebbe lives in us. The Rebbe lives in each one of us, in every chassid. Like he said from the Gemara over and over again, Ma'azari b'chaim, avhu b'chaim, as long as his seeds continue to be planted and grow, and his children live in his footsteps, they follow in his ways, and they're inspired by his lead, and they continue to do what it is that he inspired, he lives in them and by them and through them. So this is a big Yom Tov. It's especially a big Yom Tov considering the fact that 35 years ago we experienced Gimel Tammuz, whatever it is, 30 years ago. None of you ever met the Rebbe, right? Your meeting the Rebbe has to do with this Yom Tov. 30 years after Gimel Tammuz, you come here and you want to develop personal relationships with the Rebbe. Some of you succeed, some of you don't succeed. It's one of the great challenges of every person to develop a personal relationship with the Rebbe. And of course, ultimately, the highest level of being a Lubavitcher is to serve, to live our lives in doing the things the Rebbe wants us to do, to help bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, each one in our own corner, each one in our own way, but we try our best to serve. Some of us serve directly, some of us serve indirectly, some of us serve officially, some of us serve unofficially, but we all try to be Chassidim of the Rebbe. The foundation of all of that is this celebration. That the idea that the life of a tzaddik was never a physical life, never. The life of a tzaddik was a spiritual life. And spirits don't die. As long as there are candles with fuel, holding on to that flame, that spirit lives. If chas v'sholom, all the fuel is exhausted, and the fuel is not renewed, and the fuel is not replaced, then that flame floats away. And the challenge to the identity of Lubavitch, and the Didan Notzach, the victory of Lubavitch, was in very small part about books. It was in a very small part about 770. It was in a much bigger part about the Rebbe. And as much as it's about the Rebbe, people, it's about us. Every boy and girl who comes into Lubavitch, who was born in Lubavitch, and somehow grows up to be a chassid. I have a former student that I communicated last night. He learned by me close to 30 years ago. A wonderful boy. His life has not been easy, but he calls himself an atheist. I mean, he's an atheist like I'm an astronaut, like I'm a marshal, like I'm an astronaut. But he's an atheist. So he met my son yesterday on Mivtzayim. The guy's in his 40s. He went with them on Mivtzayim. I don't put some film every day. And he actually did it. The recordings are so delicious. He said, Mivtzayim's hard. And he was one of my best students. It's a painful story. We're friends. We're quite warm to each other. So he was talking to my son, who was all of 17, about his relationship with me, and I knew him in 1997, when I had 2 or 3 kids, almost 30 years ago. And he was so turned on by this, by going on Mivtzayim. Just going with the button, watching them. He knew the Rebbe personally. He's probably born in 1978, 79. He knew the Rebbe well. He's watching kids who were born 15 years after Gimel Tammuz, and he sees them, and it just he didn't watch them. He participated. He went. So I went on Mivtzayim. Mivtzayim is hard. And I'm watching these kids, and what impressed him the most was that it's sitting in the van on the way to the Mivtzayim. What were they doing? They were learning Rambam. He says, they blew me away. Those boys are Teves. Those boys and their lives, and it's not a perfect system, and not everybody comes out. It's tough. A lot of the kids go through all kinds of stuff like everybody else in the world, but they, on one level or another, the Rebbe touches them, a Rebbe that they never saw. And when they grow up and they have Chassidus, and they have this real connection to the Rebbe, that is Didan Notzach. That's the victory of the books. Because the victory of the books is not about the books. The victory of the books about the viability of the Rebbe. The Rebbe lives in us, in each chassid, in every boy and girl, in every man and woman, in every good deed, in every Beis Chabad. So this holiday is not just personal and important, it's alive. We have a day in our calendar that we celebrate Didan Notzach. Now the way we celebrate Notzach is you go buy books. That's the custom, okay? Chanukah, you light candles. Hey Teves, you buy books. But buying books, those are the customs, you know? The neshama of this day, the spirit of this day, is a celebration of the idea that a human being lived on this earth, and for reasons that known only to God, for the last 30 years, physically at least, we don't see him walking this earth. But he's alive in each one of us. Because the way he lived his life defined him not by his body, but by his spirit. And that spirit is stronger now than it was 30 years ago. And every day that passes is stronger than it was the day before. That's alive. That's amazing. It's alive. And this is the Yom Tif. When people say they're celebrating books, it's for me it's anticlimactic. It's not books. It's the Rebbe. And it's not even the Rebbe. It's Chassidim. It's Chassidim. So if you're new to Lubavitch and you're hearing about this for the first time, and it sounds so embarrassing, try to understand the spiritual side of this. And appreciate that when the Rebbe first started, the very, very beginning, that was the side he showed. He showed the spiritual side, the life of a Rebbe. And he absolutely connected the life of a Rebbe to the life of Chassidim. And the life of Chassidim is us. And in due time, Ritz Hashem, your children. And we're expecting Mashiach, you know that. We're expecting Mashiach forthwith. So at some point, there's going to be a whole different situation, right? But at the moment, this is the challenge. Anyway, I hope I presented the idea accurately and alive and positively and joyously. Okay? We're good? Yes. Anybody want to say anything? You have... Because Mrs. Yaffe is going to knock on the door in 4 minutes. And when she knocks, you can't ignore her. So if anybody wants to speak, you have 4 minutes to say what's on your mind. Okay, I'll let you go early. Go eat lunch.
Wait, actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
Why, why was it different by the Frierdiker Rebbe and our Rebbe about the books and dividing the assets, and like the other Rebbe it seemed...
They didn't do it. So you have to read get a hold of the judge's verdict. Okay. I'm sure you can find it online. And read it. First of all, the Rebbe did do something different. The previous Rebbe made a change. What the judge ascertained, he was a smart man. He studied Lubavitch, was that what the previous Rebbe did formally was always true informally. It wasn't incorporated. In the shtetl of Lubavitch in Russia, you didn't have to legally incorporate Lubavitch. It was a corporation that didn't have a stamp. Everybody understood that a Rebbe and his community are a place of the meeting in public and private, which really explained, and the judge understood this, that although there was division of estates in earlier generation, that Abayim did it reluctantly. They would have preferred that it wouldn't be divided. Because of the nature of America and the nature of finance in America, or the Rebbe said once, in America, money is the golden calf. It's true. And also very importantly, the nature of the evolution of Lubavitch. Lubavitch was going to take a much more public and formal role than it ever did. Lubavitch was a very insular Chassidus. Lubavitch was an elite Chassidus for very smart people. It wasn't a street Chassidus. It wasn't for everybody. And now Lubavitch has become the most for everybody Chassidus. For all of these reasons, the Rebbe saw the need. And he did it right away, you should know. The Frierdiker Rebbe was a very interesting man. As soon as he came to this country, he made new organizations and incorporated everything. He wanted everything to be legal, recognized by the state, by the federal government, by the local government. That these are official organizations. There was a tax number for Merkez, there was a tax number for Machane Yisrael, there was a tax number for Agudas Chabad. The Rebbe wanted everything to be on board. It was very important to him. And you can see it in his writings, in his letters. And the Rebbe did it, the previous Rebbe did it because he understood the nature of America. He understood that in America you have to do things. What the judge appreciated was that he was really continuing the old tradition, that a Rebbe is a meeting point between the notion of public and the notion of private. He can do whatever he wants, but he can do whatever he wants because he's the ambassador of the community. but that in America was necessary to incorporate. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Agud Chanukah, Agud Chedesh, Agud Yom Tov.